again, my name is Don Riggs, and this particular presentation is based on hive dipping. I've been a beekeeper now, I'm going on my 3rd year, so I'm fairly new to this, but I have kind of been very fascinated by it, and I like these are just so interesting to me, and I think that's what people like to do, and the fact we can have a complete an organism in one box, or a whole colony in one box, is kind of really interesting. It's kind of like an ant farm with wings. So I'm really, I've got to say, my first year I didn't take the mite process, and I did lose my hives the first year. But since then, I've been doing quite a bit better with the mite treatments. I'm going to add Chris here with the mite treatment. So, okay. So, and welcome. Okay. Yeah, there's Mike. Came in. Or maybe he went back out again. I'm not sure. Okay, anyway. Okay, this is me. I'm Don Riggs. And just a background on me, as I'm a retired manufacturing consultant. I traveled all around the country working on bringing up computer systems. The only reason I mentioned this is I was honored by Microsoft as one of their most valuable people. And really what this is just a community that Microsoft selects on based on their contributions to the outside world, you know, the kind of things they do and that type of stuff. I'm the only one in West Virginia, so so I have that distinction. So I thought it was important to put that on there. What it means is I'm a little bit technical, and I do own my own sawmill. I'm really retired now, so to speak. I still do some work, but I operate my own sawmill, and I'm cutting white pine right now. That'll be suitable for sheeting or hives. I do manufacture some woodenware. I offer some for sale, but it's more of a hobby more than anything else, but we may expand that. We're talking about a manufacturing facility in Parkersburg, West Virginia. From the sawmill, you can see we have the raw materials. I am a beekeeper. I've got 120 acres in Tyler County. I've got 6 hives in one place and 2 hives over in another location, but I'm looking to expanding next year, and I built a big new bee yard, so I've got to put something in it to fill that yard, so I'll be expanding quite a bit next year. I'm a member of 2 clubs, and that's the Monongalia, and that's up in Morgantown, and then the Mountaineer is more towards my area. They're near West Union is where they're meeting at this point. I'm a lifetime WVBA member, and all that really means is I paid for a lifetime membership. So lifetime really only extends to 3 years. And BPI is my company name. I have a couple brand names, Bearsville Bees and Bearsville Lumber, because the little community I'm in is called Bearsville. So, so that's how that came about. All right, so really what I wanted to explain is what is wax dipping, just for start out in general terms. And really when you think of wax dipping, what it is, the process itself is you melt wax and a rosin, which is really pine sap. And you heat that and melt it, and then you submerge your woodenware components into it. So that's what the process is. Stay in that process for a while. I'm going to go in more detail about the process, but pure and simple, that's what it is. So the next thing is, what is the purpose? Well, the purpose is to treat the woodenware components by more or less impregnating it with a heated mixture of the wax and rosin. And what it does is it actually gets sucked into the woodenware. And pretty much then this creates a waterproof bond that will last a long time. So you don't have the every year painting or painting every 2 or 3 years. The biggest thing is it is no painting. You don't have to paint. is what the advantage really is. And for me, you know, that's a big advantage. So the inspiration came as it was one of my first meetings at the Mountaineer Bee Clubs. And they started talking about wax dipping. They had purchased a tank and they were trying to figure out how to do wax dipping. And quite honestly, you know, as a beginning beekeeper, you know, it's funny. Bee clubs and bee people are just very kind people, as everybody knows. And they will answer your question with 5 different answers, given with the most enthusiasm you can imagine. And they got to think some of us are not very bright, is what I think sometimes. But they don't let on. I mean, they're just wonderful, wonderful people. And I really enjoy my time at the clubs and working with people and finding out information from them. And I go out a lot of times out to their facility. So the only thing that I knew from that is that I generally knew what it was and what its purpose was. And I knew I needed some kind of tank, and that was one of the biggest first searches. And the biggest thing for me, it was an alternative to painting. I've tried to go through my whole career trying to avoid painting at all costs. I find that I get more paint on me than on what I'm trying to put the paint on, and I just got to say, I'm just not very good at it. So I was really excited that I would have a process that I didn't have to use painting. Okay, so I was all in. So the first obstacle is really the beginning obstacle that most of us have, okay, is that I didn't know anything about it. So that's never deterred me too much in the past, you know, but generally I had to do research to try to figure out, well, what are the components? How does it work? How do you set it up? You know, I started with knowing that such a thing existed, and I had to kind of learn on my own from there. There's a lot of good, there's good articles out there. There's good discussion links that talk about it. But in general, I had to find out. So I'm going to suggest to you that there's not that many projects that get started with so little knowledge. And so I had made the decision before I even knew what it was. But it was just by the weight of the fact I wouldn't have to paint the hives. So going through this, what I determined or found out I needed was obviously I got to have some kind of tank or vessel to heat the wax in and dip the woodenware in. Of course, I would need the wax itself. Through my studies, they talked about the use of something called rosin, which is for pretty much bee sap. I believe that his purpose in it, although it's not stated any place I could find, is I think to thin out the wax a little bit to make it more better absorbed into the wood. Obviously, we'd need a heat source to heat the wax. And of course, we needed woodenware that we're going to dip into the tank. So that's kind of the knowledge I started with. And the tank was pretty problematic because, you know, I was looking at to have a tank built or try to buy a tank, and it was pretty cost prohibitive. So, so I just was at a Rural King one day, and I just happened on, in my exhausting product search, I thought, well, why couldn't I use a stock tank? And quite frankly, I believe this is one of the most unique usage of a stock tank that I could imagine. So as you can see, this was a pretty low cost operation that I started here. And you're actually still using, I may get a custom tank, I'll talk about that later built, but this is what I did. And so I think in the tank itself, there's only like maybe $60 invested. I don't even think it was that much, quite frankly. This is like a 4 foot by, I think it's like 4 foot by 2 foot wide and 4 foot deep, I think. and it's a I think the purpose is used it is for more gardening or something like that, for that type of stock tank, because I can't see it being used much for stock, but the bottom line is that's what it is. My immediate concern was, though, is the seams in these tanks. I was wondering, because in the old days they used to use like a solder and things like that, but they must use something more more like a weld process, because this tank is held up now for going on the 3rd year. And so I actually canceled the idea of the custom one until I fully decided and worked on some of the other concerns and issues I have. Any questions at this point? Okay, so again, and I'll go through the how I went about deciding on the equipment, but as you can see, pretty simple. Propane tank, you've got a heat source down here on cinder blocks and with the stock tank. So there isn't a whole lot of money invested in this setup. So you don't have to have a huge barrier to cost or get started in if you're interested. Okay. Okay, so so what I like to say is the equipment is a beautiful example of West Virginia rural engineering. And I'm very proud that we're able to put this together at a low cost, that it works. And I kind of had a lot of fun. I have a lot of fun kidding about it, but as you can see, it wasn't a big expense. So the tank is, again, a Teeter stock tank from Rural King. And the shipping would cost more than the tank, so I actually had it sent to the store and I picked it up at the store. Otherwise, it would cost me more to ship it than the tank cost. The heat source, I started in the first iteration, the first year. The first time I tried to do it, I tried to use wood. And you can heat with wood, and that's not really a problem, but obviously wood is harder to control. It's harder to bring down the temperature. There's a number of different reasons why wood isn't the best. It certainly is the cheapest alternative, and I have plenty of wood, so it wouldn't, the sourcing of the wood wouldn't have been a problem whatsoever. But the next I tried was a heater from a turkey fryer. So you know those when you heat up the oil and you put the turkey down in it. It was just one of those heaters to heat that fryer, and it just wasn't able to generate enough heat. So I went to a propane heater with a higher BTU, and that I just ordered from Amazon, and so it's just the same concept. It just has more. It can generate more heat. For those of you looking at the process, what I ended up is I got the wax. I started with scrap from candle making from Candlewick. I used that the first couple years. And then this year I went ahead and bought virgin paraffin wax. And I'll talk about a little bit later about why I went to that process. But the problem with the scrap is you have a lot of scent, which is very nice when you're melting it, but it smells very nice. But then also the scraps had things like gloves and all kinds of other stuff in there that once you melted, you had to kind of fish out of the process. So I went to the virgin. It probably added maybe 50% more on my cost, so it wasn't a huge increment above the scrap. Also this year, because everything's down, we didn't have scrap anyway. So when I talked to the people at Candlewick, we came up with a wax that I could buy enough of a quantity that they would ship it for free. Because that's the biggest problem with these things, is the shipment costs you more. So in the first year, I actually drove out to Candlewick is in eastern Pennsylvania near Philadelphia. And so I drove my pickup truck and got a pickup load of the wax. And then R.E. Carroll was just over on the Jersey side, and that's where I got the gum rosin. And that was they came in 50-pound bags and at $1.85 a pound. And just so you know, for the tank I have, it takes about 200 or more of wax, 200 pounds of wax, and that means it's about 100 pounds of the rosin. So you mix it 2 to 1. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, so that gives you an idea what the equipment was, kind of where I had to figure out where to get wax. So I didn't know where to get wax, and if you can buy wax anywhere from $5 for a little piece to, you know, I'll spend about $600 or something like that on wax. What it does, by the way, is adds about, if you consider labor in the process, it adds about $2.50 on, let's say, a deep. So it's not unusual if people were to charge you maybe $4 to dip the hive. But when you consider you never have to paint it again, you dip it once, you know, that's still a pretty good investment if you can find somebody that is doing it. So this was more to me as an intellectual curiosity, and I dip my own hives, and I've offered the dipping to other people to come out, and so it's a chance to get together, and then also, again, it's the maintenance aspect. Okay, so personal safety and measurement. Well, obviously, you're heating this wax up. And by the way, and I cover this a little bit more later, the wax itself and the resin is flammable. So you have to be aware of that. So there is a certain amount of risk that you have to consider. And you know, it's just like anything, it's good to have your protective equipment. So we wore a safety glass, or I would use my regular glasses. You want some manner of heat-proof gloves. We started with welding gloves. You know, you can use other types of gloves, but the boxes obviously get pretty hot. I've gone to like a silicone mitten, but it's not so bad to handle them with other types of gloves, but you want something heat resistant. The problem with the welding gloves is it's pretty cumbersome to do anything in welding gloves. You should wear a long sleeve shirt or long pants and some manner of boots. I did one time, I didn't have my feet covered properly and spilled some wax down in my shoe, and that was not a pleasant experience. So so I've learned now to you know, dress better. So it's a shame that some people can't learn by just thinking about it. They have to experience it, right? So, and then I use an infrared thermometer, and you'll need a timer because you're going to put them in the vat of liquid. And then you need some type of weight then to hold the boxes down into the substance. And again, I didn't get a picture of it, but I'm using like, I don't know what the name of it is. It's like the dumbbell with one handle on it. I think it's called a barbell or something like that. I use that to hold things down. So you can see it's a pretty low cost operation. And the other thing too is you also want to cover it when you're done and put something on the top of it. And I'll talk about why that is the case. Okay, now I want to suggest to you that here's a good example of a wax dipping staff. It should be obvious from the appearance of them that it doesn't require a great deal of intelligence to do this. In fact, if you take these two guys here, you add them up and you'd get like a full wit, I think, is what you'd get out of it. On the other side, both of them are veterans. The one is a Navy veteran who's a submariner. The other one is a Marine. I'll let you guess which is which, but it's certainly the better looking one that's from the Navy. So it's a veteran operation too. So it's you know, even if you're intellectual challenged, you know, this is something that everyone can do. There's not a lot. You're dropping them in there, holding something down and taking them back out. You just got to be careful. So I'm trying to make a little bit of a joke. I'm hoping you're enjoying that part of it. But if not, I'm an old consultant. We can talk to you for hours and tell you all kinds of stories. So that's part of your job as a traveling consultant. All right. So here's the staff, and so again, and you can see, by the way, the mismatched gloves, and certainly very fashionable, very fashionable. Okay. Well, I'd like to suggest the same holds true with the You know, there's no Einstein in this group, but they're really good guys, and these guys are from both of the bee clubs, and we had a good time that day. They came out, we dipped the hives, but we ran into some problems, and I certainly applaud their patience. So if you recognize any of these guys, then then that's great. If not, then that's fine too. So, all right. So here's what the process is. You'll notice here on the left, what you've got is that's your mixture, and that's really, when it's close to temperature, what it should look like. So I'm going to cover some of the things that happen in this process. But generally, here's your process. You're going to heat the mixture to 225 to 265 degrees. Now, just so you know, when I'm at 225, I'll dip them for 15 minutes. If I'm closer to 265, which is hard to maintain, by the way, you'll many times find yourself dipping down to the 225 because obviously when you put the woodenware in, it cools the vat of liquid down while the water in the box is in the woodenware itself is flashing the steam. But you'll leave them in there for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then you just remove the components so they can cool. And you'll usually just take the weight off the top, it'll pop out, and then you go through one after another, and you kind of drain the wax off, and then take it over and set it someplace, and then put the next batch in. Is what it's good to have a book or something you're listening to while you're doing that. So hold on, let me just, oh, Justin's, yeah, I'm just gonna let somebody in the room. Okay. Hey, Justin, how you doing? So again, that's really what the process is. Pretty simple. Okay, so again, this is and more of this is theory and assumption than science, because I've seen pieces of what people say it does. I'm not an engineer or a chemist, so I'm part of this is assumption or what I've read, but pretty much I think we can assume that this is pretty accurate of what actually happens is what we're saying. So one of the first things we've got to do is keep in mind that the wax bath itself is above the boiling point. And I'll give you a little interesting fact that happens the first year, and how I read. Let's say I didn't have the heat source exactly right, but what it does is it boils out the water, and it flashes the steam, because you can see it bubbling when you put the box in. And what that creates is a vacuum in the structure. So you're boiling it out, it flashes out its steam, but that would create a vacuum in the structure. Okay, once it's removed, you will have wax mixture on the surface, which you can see the wood absorbing it into the wood. So you can actually see the process. Now, depending on the density of the wood, if something softer will absorb more than something wood that's harder. But if you think about on the big picture, the harder wood probably lasts longer, and it does get enough to seal it. In fact, I can leave the hives out in the rain, and they'll just have water bead up all over them. So really what the end is that creates a water resistant layer, not only on the surface, because that's what paint does, is it puts a layer on the surface, but this mixture also goes below the surface into the hive or the box itself. Now, and this eliminates the painting and will be virtually the life of the product. And I've had them out there for quite a bit. Now, they'll still get gray on the outside, because natural wind and things like that will eventually take that top layer and will remove some of the wax, but the wax is still inside is still impregnated in the box. So it handles it very nicely. In fact, one of the things you got to do is, if you have a wax dip hive, you should consider ventilation in any hive is very important. But you're more sealed with a wax hive, so even ventilation is, in my opinion, even more important when you've got the wax sealed. But but there's usually plenty of ways to get ventilation. But again, you're not having the hive won't necessarily breathe, but I don't think they breathe that much anyway. But keep in mind too, it won't absorb moisture. Keep in mind, when wood absorbs moisture, that moisture stays in there till you have enough heat from the sun to drive it out. So in my way of thinking, you would have also less problems with mildew or rot and those kind of things, because the rot itself virtually goes away. Now, what can go wrong? Okay, and just so you know, although we didn't have a whole lot of money up front, in it up front, there was certainly still a pretty steep learning curve. And so everything didn't necessarily just roll out and was perfect from day one. So one of the first things is you got to always remember that wax is flammable. You are operating on 225 to 265 degrees. The flash point, by the way, is 400 degrees Fahrenheit for paraffin. That's still a pretty good band of time, or pretty good band and temperature, but pretty good safety zone. And it's hard with the type of stuff I'm talking about to even get it up to 400 degrees. You have to be aware of, though, anything that spills out of the tank or something like that can catch fire, and you can have a local fire. But we've not had any kind of problems because it actually burns fairly slow. But you have to be aware of the fact that it can catch on fire. You have to be aware of that fact. Burns. Yeah, it doesn't mix well with exposed skin, as I found out. In other words, it's pretty stupid to wear sandals to the wax tank. So it's a shame I had to learn that lesson the hard way, but it didn't cause any permanent damage. It just was very uncomfortable. Here's the big thing that people have to really understand. You want moisture in the mixture. Moisture has to be boiled out before the process even starts. So if you're getting water and things into your mixture, you may have to wait all day to heat it up all day just to drive all the moisture out of the wax. And this was the problem I had big time. I kept the wax over the winter, and I didn't have it sealed as well as I should. So what happens there is then you've got to boil all that water out. And if you think about it, as the water boils out, it's cooling down your wax mixture. So the whole idea is you want to seal out as much moisture as you can. Like, it's really not a good thing to think about trying to do the wax dipping in the rain, because that doesn't work that well. It's hard to get your temperature up. So when your temperature is right and your water's out, because the water itself causes the wax to actually bubble. And it can, in fact, boil over the top, let's say, if you try to put the boxes in. So it's just a matter of you got to be patient. Now, once you drive it out, it still takes a while to get it up to temperature, but it doesn't take that time. It's about a fifth of the time to take from cold to like the temperature between one that has a lot of water in it and one that has no water in it. So that's it. It doesn't make any difference how much water is in the wood you bring, but you do have to start with, I'm just going to let somebody in. You do have to start with the wax having all the water boiled out to it, because you can't, well, as you can see, it's got to be, you have to have all the water so you can start. Another problem that I'm still having, and again, in reading and looking at YouTube, which is the class for adults, right? And children, actually, that's true too. I'm having a problem with rosin clumps. So let me illustrate. The rosin itself and the wax do kind of mix together. And once they're mixed together, they don't separate. Let me grab a couple more people coming in. They don't separate. So the problem is, if you're not careful and you put the clumps of the rosin in, it goes to the bottom of the tank and it can create a tar-like material, much like if you cooked pine tar. That causes a lot of discoloration or black, almost tarry-like substances that if you have something all the way to the bottom or on top of that layer, those deposits get on your woodenware. So I'm going to talk about what I'm going to be doing with this and what I figured out and what I'm working on to try to solve this. But really, it's got to be a better blending of the rosin and the wax and up front. And like I said, I've been out there and people say, well, yeah, that's just a part of the problem, but I don't necessarily think it has to be. And so I'm going to work on that. Another is heat too low. In the first year, when I did this, I, in fact, had that problem because when I read it, it said 165 degrees. You heat it up to 165 degrees, and then you dip your highs. Well, if you think about it, because it will never raise the temperature in the wood to boil the wood out. Now, it'll make a nice coating on the outside. I have a number of hives out there that way. But what the problem was is that it was 165 degrees centigrade they were talking about. Because see, in Australia and over in Europe, they dip the hives quite a bit. But that was, it didn't say that in the thing I read. It said 165 that high. But if you look at height, but it's somewhere in that area. But so the next year we were up to 225, and that's when the process started working better. And then lastly, foreign materials is that you can get foreign materials in the wax from outside, and whether that's bugs that come in from outside, rain, leaves, whatever, that's why it's important to keep it sealed. And also, there was a problem when we used the scrap wax from the candle making process. So if I ever use that again, and I doubt it, but if I ever can, there'll be a purging process, and I'm going to talk about that next, that I will go through. And that's exactly what I'm doing pretty much now. Okay, so now I just want to talk about a little where I'm going. I mean, this got me this far. So now I'm looking at really refining the process. And the biggest problem is, of course, the rosin that goes to the bottom of the tank, that we got to try to figure out a way to solve that problem. Again, somebody said, you know, I've been told that's a natural process. Now, one alternative is to have a riser for the tank bottom. That would be a fairly easy way to solve the problem, but still, I would rather solve the problem in the mixture rather than have to accommodate for the fact we get that tar in there, because I believe it's just not properly combined with the wax. And by the way, it goes downhill from there, because once you have that tar mixture at the bottom, you almost have to purge your whole tank to get that out of there. And if you're not careful, you also can get that as a mixture, suspended mixture in your wax. And that even makes it worse. So yeah, I've got somebody else joining. So what I'm planning on doing is, number one, refine my tank purging and wax reprocessing. The wax, even when it gets this mixture in it, there are ways that I can use it to take out the solids and everything that through the wax, through a wax boiling or working with cheesecloth or things like that, because I really want to be able to reprocess that wax, not have to just put virgin in every year. But the other alternative is you just get rid of your wax every year. But the bigger problem is the pre-mixing of the rosin and the wax. I believe that we have to start by mixing smaller batches and then making sure the rosin is very powdered, and then mix them up to try to avoid that. Again, because I'm not a chemist, I don't know if this will permanently solve the problem. I think it may, but because I don't think they break down to their constituent components, I think it would remain suspended. Therefore, are giving me a better outcome. But again, it's the things on the bottom that are the ones that you have the problem. Okay. Another thing because I talked about the riser, I'm considering what's an alternative to rosin. I've talked to the candle people, and there are certain oils, but obviously the property has to be that it's going to make the wax itself a more fluid or a lighter, I think a lower specific gravity, or thinner, I think is the word I was searching for. So I want to look and see, is there something else that I can use with the wax to thin it down? Because that would be probably the best decision, unless it's cost prohibitive, because cost does enter into this. I already have the design for a custom built tank. It's just a question of, do I do it this year or not? So I'm doing work for a company that builds a lot of stainless stuff, and so they're interested in bartering for some of my time for this. So I'm looking at the possibility of doing that. The biggest thing, the custom built tank, it would double my throughput. So right now the smaller tank, you can only get like 6 or so pieces in there at a time, whereas I'd be able to get like 12 if I had a tank that was just slightly bigger. Okay. I talked about the wax mixtures. And then of course I do want to try to better understand the science, of these, the properties of these, because if I better understood the science, I would better understand how to solve the problem. Okay. Okay, and so this is what you have when you have a good result. Okay, you can see that on the right, or the boxes that have been dipped. So they'll change a little bit of color. You'll notice if you look closely, there's a little bit of surface wax on them, which I typically just scrape off. Because again, it absorbs the wax different on different parts. But generally, if you've got everything right, exactly right, you'll have the lower two are better examples of how it should look when you got it 100% right. So you can see it does maintain a lot of its beauty. That's the other thing too, is I think wood is beautiful. I have a sawmill, so I'm very fond of wood, and I think it makes it's a nicer looking presentation. But again, as they age, they may turn a little bit gray, but generally they will keep their beauty overall. Okay. Well, that's really what I had. I mean, do you all feel that gave you a better idea of what the process was about, and what some of the properties are? Are there any questions? By the way, Justin, who's on, he was at that first meeting when they were talking about the tanks, and that's what launched me on this process. Oh. Right. Justin, he was glad he could help. Get any questions, or any question about this or anything else that I might be able to help you? Okay. Yes. The ratio is 2 to 1. So it's 2 part wax to 1 part rosin. So, well, obviously, if you have a couple 100 pounds of wax, then you need 100 pounds of rosin. So I think, again, I'm looking at probably doing a different type of way to mix it. Okay. Okay. Joe asks, how long does it take to melt the wax and get it up to temperature? Again, it depends, but generally, if you have water in it, it can take all day. I mean, you'll start in the morning and the wax won't be ready till just before dark. If you don't have water in it, it only takes about 3 hours. 3, maybe 4 hours, but it takes half the time. In fact, less than half the time to melt. if you don't have water in the mixture. So it's real important to have a good top on it and keep the moisture out of your wax tank. Other questions? Is anybody out there going to try this? Any other questions or anything else I can add? Okay, well, I want to thank you all for attending my session. As you know, this is the first time we've attempted that. And yeah, I've got another question, I'll cover that. And so we really like feedback on how you felt about the process, because, you know, with the way things are out there right now, is we wanted to be able to provide content and we wanted to try to do as quality as we could. So, so I've got a question for you. How long does it take to melt the wax and get up there? That's what we just talked about. Do the knots stay intact? Yeah, the answer is yes. They tend to stay intact much better than if you just painted it, because remember, what usually causes the knot is the shrinkage and the moisture and the changing in moisture. So it tends to, I haven't had a knot failure that where the knot was in there in the beginning. You know, we've had knot failures when we're building the woodenware. And actually some of those that I might use for my own stuff. You know how it is when you're, everybody gets the best, everyone that are not quite perfect. So I've got some of the uglier ones, but the bees are pretty forgiving on a lot of that stuff, but the knots do stay. I've not had one knot failure on a dipped hive. You can dip plywood, but in fact, I will do that in some cases, and I'll tell you where I dip the plywood. We make a screen bottom board, and then we have a drop-in kind of combination. Well, it's more of a landing board that we can drop that screen bottom board in. We will dip those. The thing is, it makes them a lot heavier. It will absorb a lot of wax, so it is costly. But you know, so we try to stay from plywood. In some cases, plywood's the best answer. By the way, we also use plywood on our tops, so it will absorb a lot more of the wax. But again, they'll last virtually forever. And we want, by the way, I want my tops to be pretty heavy. Anyway.